Of all the different video games that have taken the industry by storm, perhaps no other games have had as big of an influence as the Soulsborne games. Pioneered by developer From Software, these games are known for their tough but rewarding and fair difficulty, their elaborate lore, and for close-quarters sword-based combat involving lots and lots of rolling. Even though the influence of FromSoft's Soulsborne genre can be felt all across gaming, some still shy away from these titles due to their high difficulty and because of the supposed lack of storytelling. And while Elden Ring is arguably the game that introduced this genre to a larger audience and remedied most of these issues, I'd argue that Bloodborne is the more quote-unquote beginner-friendly game of the two. Filled with more interesting lore and a faster-paced combat system, Bloodborne is the best of the genre. Hi, my name is Jay, and these are the Gaming Essentials. I know there are probably going to be many people watching this who've probably already played a Soulsborne game, whether they've realized it or not. From Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, Lies of P, and the actual entries like Demon's Souls and Elden Ring, this genre has become practically ubiquitous throughout gaming. So why do a video on it? Because even though these games have become very mainstream and popular, that doesn't mean they always get the attention they deserve, even from Bloodborne's own publisher, PlayStation. Almost 10 years after Bloodborne's initial release, fans are still clamoring for an updated, remastered re-release. For almost any major video game events where publishers unveil their next lineup of games, you'll find plenty of fans online screaming, "Where's Bloodborne? Is Bloodborne Remastered going to get announced?" With pitchforks in hand and massive amounts of copium, the Bloodborne and the Soulsborne community in general have helped bolster and elevate the genre to almost radical heights. But for good reason, as Bloodborne is more than just a tough-as-nails game. It is, in many ways, an art house piece, unlike any other. Whether or not you're a Soulsborne expert who's defeated the Cleric beast millions of times, or are someone still on the fence about this genre, allow me to extend a hand to both hardcore and casual audiences to explain why Bloodborne is a gaming essential. Even though Elden Ring is the more popular sibling, with almost 30 million sold copies and plenty of Game of the Year awards, I'd argue that Bloodborne is the more welcoming of the two. And for me personally, the one I actually like more. And I know some would probably even agree with me on that. I love Elden Ring and can't deny its overall importance, but there were times when I felt it was a bit too big. Some areas could be insanely dense, with so many different areas and pathways to explore, that it was very easy for me to get lost or not know where to go. And another common criticism with Soulsborne games is that combat can be somewhat dull, with a lot of dodging and rolling involved, and mainly just using one strategy of poke the enemy in the butt with R1 till they fall, being the main tactic. They may lack the depth of action as some games like Devil May Cry or Ninja Gaiden, but Bloodborne does solve and improve upon some of those issues. Let's start with the game's story. Set in a Victorian-era Gothic megacity known as Yharnam, the player character wakes up and is imbued with the identity of the Hunter. Their task at first is to survive the night and rid the streets of lichen and zombified-like beasts that roam the streets. Equipped with a bladed weapon and a gunpowder-infused firearm, the Hunter will have to explore these awe-inspiring environments and meet some fairly spooky and odd individuals if they want to survive.
They'll be safe here. The incense wards off the beasts. Spread the word. Tell them to come on over, if you wouldn't mind.
I won't get into too much detail about the game's story, because that's best discovered on your own, and it's one of the best parts of the game. And also because That's another deep rabbit hole that VaatiVidya could explain a lot better than I could. The game is filled with a lot of secrets and lore that is up for interpretation. What are the great ones? Why is there a creepy talking doll helping you?
Would you ever think to love me? Of course. I do love you.
I don't know, just go with it. The main draw of this game is the world and its atmosphere, filled with gorgeously detailed churches, graveyards, and yes, the dreaded poisonous swamps. Bloodborne's story and environments are all like deep rabbit holes. They both invite you to go deeper and deeper into them. But the levels aren't too big, to the point where it's still fairly simple to find where to go, and the story is still straightforward, so it doesn't take much to piece it all together. The community has put together some amazing lore videos and wikis about the story of Bloodborne, but I think even they would say that they don't know everything about the game's lore, and that it's highly interpretive. And that, to me, is amazing. Like the best art, we could come back to and look at it and still come away with different readings and emotions. And for those that do come back to this game, they'll find their commitment to be rewarded. With multiple endings, environments, and stories with endless amounts of depth, you'll want to keep coming back to this. Even if the game continuously increases its difficulty, still making Martyr Ligarius the biggest jerk on the planet. It also helps that Bloodborne's music and art style is also truly mesmerizing, combining various gothic and steampunk elements with the eldritch and a straight-up horror soundtrack. Bloodborne has a look and feel to it that'll burrow its way into your mind. Another reason why I enjoy Bloodborne more than Elden Ring is its combat. As a very offensive, rushdown type player, Bloodborne rewards my kind of playstyle. In most Soulsborne games, the roll is a very powerful defensive tool where the player cannot take damage during its animation. But in Bloodborne, this option isn't as potent, as the roll is mainly substituted with a dash that doesn't have as many invincibility frames. Rather than encourage a player to hang back and study their opponent, Bloodborne encourages the player to get in and take the fight to the enemy. And that's thanks to two mechanics: the regain system and the firearms. In Bloodborne, when the player gets hit, there's a temporary window where the player can regain their health back if they retaliate. Because healing items can be rare and hard to get in these games, having and conserving health is highly important. So when the player gets hit, rather than dodging and rolling back to use a health item, the player is incentivized to rush back up to their opponents and hack away as much as possible to regain health before the orange bar goes away. And if the player builds their character appropriately, the player can be an unstoppable swinging machine, hacking away at opponents, never taking any damage. The second mechanic that makes Bloodborne so much fun is its firearms. Traditionally, Soulsborne games equip the player at the start with a sword in one hand and a shield in the other. But Bloodborne equips the player with a gun. The obvious application is so that the player can just straight up shoot their opponents, knocking them back and killing them when they're at low health. But what makes guns even more fun in this game is their ability to parry attacks. Shooting an enemy right before the hit lands forces the opponent into a stunned state, allowing the player to run up, perform a visceral finishing move, and regain all their health. It's a highly rewarding offensive combat system that never gets boring. And finally, for those who still don't want to try Soulsborne games because of their difficulty, try Bloodborne, as I think the difficulty is a little more mild compared to the others. Of course, difficulty is subjective, and I know some Soulsborne experts will start a fight with me about this in the comments. But there's a reason why I think this. Because Bloodborne is so offensively focused, new players can focus more on their swings and on attacking, rather than wrapping their heads around iframes, which to me was the most toughest concept to understand when I was just starting out. And if you do find yourself in trouble, consult a guide to find where to go and to see which bosses are completely optional. Those are usually the hardest ones, and it's okay to skip them and come back to them later. This might sound like common knowledge for Soulsborne experts, but for those new or getting into it for the first time, try exploring the different areas, find easier enemies to gain more echoes, and then try coming back to the harder bosses. When you are the boss, they should be more worried about. I get that Soulsborne games aren't for everyone. Not everyone wants to come home from work and get stuck on a boss that could take them hours and hours to beat, or play a game that might not make sense to them by the end of it. But there is a reason for the madness. Bloodborne can be a nightmarish, but also blissful experience, as players go from hellish environments to peaceful, surreal moments of triumph. It shows how suffering and happiness can sometimes be separated by one giant but surmountable obstacle. Almost 10 years later, it's an absolute crime that Bloodborne hasn't gotten a remastered version with upscaled graphics and at least 60 frames per second. Having both would really help with the game's clarity and reduce frustration, giving the player more of a precise opportunity to make their big life or death combat decisions. And also, it'll help the game look prettier. If PlayStation can put out 2 different versions of The Last of Us and remaster Horizon Zero Dawn, then I think it's time to put out a remaster of Bloodborne and give new and diehard fans another reason to return to the Lovecraftian world of Yarno, which is why Bloodborne is a gaming essential. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, feel free to give me a thumbs up, as it really helps my channel to grow. Also, if there's another Soulsborne game you think deserves a spot on this list, let me know down in the comments below and I'll be happy to check it out. Be sure to also subscribe for even more of the best that video games have to offer.